The modern attack surface is vast and permeable, extending from the data center to the cloud and device edge. Security teams are stretched thinner and thinner as they try to cover this ground. The result? More high-profile breaches hit the news every day. Don't let your organization be next. ExtraHop delivers security from the inside out, helping enterprise security teams detect threats up to 95% faster and cut staff time to resolve by 2/3 or more. Act with confidence. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. Effectively securing your organization and its reputation requires a smarter approach. To maximize efficiency and minimize risk, security experts turn to LogRhythm, the only leading solution built solely for security teams by a security team committed to your success. With next-gen SIEM, user and entity behavior analytics, network traffic and behavior analysis, security automation and orchestration, and compliance, LogRhythm provides security made smarter.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian. If you are interested in quality over quantity and having meaningful conversations instead of just a badge scan, join us April 1st to 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019, where you can connect and network with like-minded individuals in search of actionable information. Visit infosec.world.misty.com/security weekly security-weekly, and use the registration code OS19-SecWeek for 15% off your main conference or world pass. We have a number of interviews scheduled with confirmed speakers across all of our shows, so please tune in to learn more about topics that will be covered at the conference. All right, let's get to our interview segment. Zane Lackey is co-founder and chief security officer at Signal Sciences and the author of Building a Modern Security Program. He serves on multiple public and private advisory boards and is an investor in emerging cybersecurity companies. Prior to co-founding Signal Sciences, Zane led a security team at the forefront of the DevOps cloud shift movement as CISO at Etsy. Zane, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's fun to be on here.
Yeah, well, we wanted to do this segment really on advisory services and advising. I wanted to start a little bit with, you're an advisor and an investor. Sometimes I think investors are also advisors, but how would you see the split in kind of the roles you play today between an investor and just an advisor?
Yeah, I think exactly like you said, the line is pretty blurry. I've seen all of the above, and also, I'm kind of doing all of that in my, I'll air quote, spare time, where, when I'm not really focused on Signal Sciences, which takes up almost all of my time. I've seen with some companies that I advise, I've seen some of the investors that they've raised money from just be the kind of type that tend to write a check and then be extremely hands-off. And sometimes that's intentional and sometimes that's just kind of unintentional. Whereas I tend to see, I've seen the same thing from advisors too. But when I try to get involved with a company, whether that's from an advising side or from an investing side, it's because I'm really passionate about helping out other founders. And so whatever mechanism that takes, whether that's via advising, whether that's via investing, or just informally chatting with other founders, I know how challenging it is, and I like to help other founders as much as possible.
Yeah, Zane, and as I look more into this aspect of helping the security community and security companies, what typically, like when someone is an advisor, is there like some kind of compensation? Like how does that work?
Yeah, it can completely vary. Sometimes, and the term advisor ends up being kind of overloaded, right? Because sometimes there's kind of a customer advisory board where it's your customers giving you feedback about the product or about your roadmap or things like that. Then there's kind of a formal advisor role, which is typically done with like a small bit of equity, just to kind of incentivize folks and everything there. Other times I've seen advisory roles where it's paid, and I've seen advisory roles where it's, even though it's not a customer advisory role, where it's a kind of traditional advisory role where it's completely non-compensated. It really depends. I've kind of seen all of the above, and I think you tend to find like what works for your advisors and for your business, and how do you really incentivize people to be involved as much as they can.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I think that's great for folks who have a startup and are like, oh, I don't have an advisor now. Like, how does all that work? That was perfect. All of the various aspects of that are perfect. So,
yeah,
and I think
it's
I
about
think it's
finding what's
also
the right fit, really.
Oh, sorry,
There's no kind of legal definition or requirement there.
Yeah, and I think part of it is how much time are you going to spend in as an advisor, right? Some advisory roles don't take up a lot of time potentially, right? You're there maybe once in a while to advise them. Other advisory roles, like the ones I have with some of my clients, are a little more involved, right? You're spending a lot more time. You're taking on aspects of filling a role potentially that they don't want to hire a full-time role for. So I think part of it, Paul, is also the amount of time and effort in that advisory capacity will also dictate kind of how that compensation model might look.
Strongly agree. I've chatted with other industry colleagues that have taken advisory roles with different startups and everything, and sometimes the only times I've ever seen it go wrong are exactly like you said, where there's a complete mismatch in expectations, where the advisor thought that they were doing something where they were going to be kind of reachable for questions and things like that, and the company maybe thought that they were almost hiring them full time to do an individual contributor role. And that's the only time I've really ever seen something in this space not go well, is when those expectations are just wildly mismatched.
Yeah. And now, Matt, I know some of your advisory roles, you've been pretty hands-on with the marketing program, for example. Zane, in some of your cases, like what kind of roles have you played in the various companies that you're advising?
Yeah, I like, I think some of the most effective stuff that I've done, you'd have to ask the companies I work with what's actually been effective, but I think the most effective stuff I've been done is being able to say, here was a very dumb thing I did, and here's how to avoid it. And here's why it was dumb, right? Learn from my mistakes along the way, because we had, in the early days of Signal Sciences, we had a lot of other founder friends that were able to guide us in a very similar fashion. And we're able to say, hey, when you're going into fundraising, or when you're making these early executive hires, or X or Y or Z, here are mistakes that we made in our companies, and here's how to think about them, and here's what we learned from them. And I think kind of paying it forward on that side is both, I think, the biggest value I've been able to add, and the thing that I've been the most excited about is really learn from my pain, avoid the mistakes that I had to make along the way, so that hopefully you can, do in 2 months what took me 8 months to figure out.
Right.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, based on your skill set as an executive, you have different insights. In my particular case, right, I've done product work, I've done marketing work, I've done alliances and integration work. And so, the role varies based on kind of your expertise and what you've been able to do. And I assume, Zane, that's the same for you, right? I mean, as an executive, as a founder, as a CISO, I mean, that's where your value comes in. So anybody trying to learn what to do or what not to do, that's where you have a really strong fit in your capacity, I would believe.
Oh, that's exactly it. And that's where it's been really interesting advising kind of different styles of companies, because what you can bring to the table for them varies wildly, right? For example, with the security companies that I advise, it's almost never giving advice about, security or how to kind of think about their early days security program, because that's in their DNA. They get that. It tends to be much more advice about raising a seed round, or raising an A, or kind of equity and compensation structure, or these kind of early things that if you're a first-time founder, there's not a lot out there to actually read or to really learn from, or it's stuff that's super out of date. So that would be for like the security companies. For other companies, in fact, some of the earliest companies that I ended up advising, it was really from a security expertise angle. Security was really important to them in the early days, but they were, a really early company. They weren't able to make their first security hires yet. And so they wanted someone that could give solid advice, that they could start on the right footing from the security perspective. And that was really where I was able to help them out.
That's great. When you look at, when people come to you and they ask you to be an advisor, what kind of evaluation criteria do you use to decide whether you're going to do it or not? I assume you don't have enough time to take on every single one. Is there some criteria you use to determine, which ones you are interested and not interested in?
Yeah, and it's pretty basic criteria. I would say there's no secret sauce there. I would say first and foremost, do we actually get along? Like myself and the founding team, right? It's like the running joke of life is too short to work with assholes is absolutely true. And so like, do we actually enjoy spending time with each other and enjoy kind of trading advice and having conversations on that? And then I think number two there is really, do I feel like I can be valuable? Right. I think there's plenty of times where you might look at something and say, I don't know how much value I'm actually going to add here. So why don't we not make this a formal relationship? How about we just have a few conversations off and on throughout, and we can reevaluate down the line if this makes sense to become something formal. But it might make sense to just we have a few conversations, and that's really the kind of the maximum value I can add here. And so I'd hate for you to actually go through all of the formality there if then we're after those conversations I'm not really gonna add that much. And so I think it's really, are we going to enjoy spending time together, and can I really add value there, and is it something I really believe in?
Are there specific areas specifically in the security market that interest you more than others? I know some of the companies you're advising because I know a few we have a lot of the same connections in the industry, so I know a few of these companies. Yeah. And I like a couple of the companies you're advising because I think they're in really hot spaces. But do you look for a certain segment, or it doesn't matter?
I certainly don't look for a certain segment or anything like that. Like I'm not going out trying to find advisory roles or anything there. It's much more I actually look I think less about the segment and much more about, do I believe in the founding team? Do I believe in the problem that they're solving? And then do we get along and can I add value? Right? Those are kind of the first two. And then it's, is this security industry snake oil? Then great. Even if we got along, and we probably wouldn't get along if that was the case, but I'm not super interested. If it's usually, I'll tell you kind of the secret sauce for me is it a space where get along with the team, you think you can add value, and it's something being built by actual practitioners, right? I think this is the things that I'm most excited about in the security industry is we're starting to see this whole new generation of security companies that are coming out of either CISOs or CTOs or security engineers, anywhere up or down the ladder there, that have been practitioners and said, this is a problem that we had to solve in-house because none of the vendors were solving it for us. And we're actually going to take that and turn that into a product or a service. Like that story I love so much because I think there's so much of the security industry that's just, hey, we know this is a hot new area, so we're going to put out a bunch of marketing on it and try to sell a product there that we know doesn't work. Like I think that's kind of been the history of the security industry a lot of times. And I think the biggest successes in the security industry have been those, folks like Duo and folks like that, where it was practitioners who really saw a problem, they were deeply passionate about it, and they solved it spectacularly.
That's great. So let me flip this for a second. All right. So we kind of talked about your criteria for advising. I want to take it from the company perspective for a second. Why would a startup want to bring on an advisor? And how would you kind of guide a company looking for advisors? Give them some advice and recommendations, because we see a lot of startups who could leverage, some of the expertise that advisors give. But how would they start? What should they expect? It would be good to get it from that angle if you could.
Yeah, I think I'd really look for two things. Number one, you're either looking for someone who can give expertise in some area that you need it. That might be technical, it might be product, it might be marketing, it might be, all of these different things that we talked about, or they can open doors in some way, right? And that might be fundraising or that might be customers. Those are kind of the big two. And so, hey, if you can get an advisor that can help out with both, fantastic. You hit the jackpot there. Typically, you end up seeing advisors that fill one of those two buckets. And so that's really what I think you think about from the company perspective is, does this plug a hole and kind of a gap of expertise that I can really draw on someone there that's going to help me out a lot? Or is this going to help open doors in a way to early investors or to early customers there? Or later stage as well, right? There's no reason it has to be early. It's just that you typically tend to add advisors early on rather than later on. But yeah,
and if
those
I'm a company,
buckets are really, I think, the majority of them. I'm curious, have you kind of seen the same thing?
Yeah, I have. I mean, typically in my role, because I've done a number of startups in the past, similar to you, I think, I have the connections with the VC community, so I can make some inroads there. I really want to help, fine tune message and their go to market strategies, maybe a little product or some other things. So yes, I think those are correct, right? You're looking for a way to open up some doors, either from a customer or a VC funding perspective, or you're looking for some very specific skill sets. And there are a few of us in the industry that can actually span both because we've been around the block long enough. But it's harder to find some of those folks sometimes. So that's, it's good to give guidance to the companies.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's it. You really think about, what are my needs as a early stage company there, and it's going to be all of the above most likely, unless this is your third, fourth, fifth company. But if you're a first time founder, I can tell you as a first time founder, there were plenty of areas there where we wanted to be able to draw on other folks' expertise. And so that was really our focus was, could they help us in one of those buckets or the other of those buckets?
Agreed. And I think it's important for the companies to understand there is some compensation expectation sometimes when you're trying to fill those gaps, right? I mean, you could go hire somebody full time, but that's expensive as an early stage startup. So there is an expectation that advisors are going to want some sort of compensation. We talked a little bit about this, but from the company side, just realize that it may not have to be an hourly rate. It could be a little bit of equity. It incentivizes the advisors to really work on a positive outcome for the company. And so I think that's the other important thing for some of these startups to realize is that you're not going to get a lot of free advice that's valuable longer term. If you're really looking for some of that advice and you're looking for some help in certain areas, there's going to be some compensation component typically to it.
Absolutely.
I think what's interesting too, Zane, sorry to cut you off, but
no, go for it.
I think some startups and most startup founders, right, in any industry or vertical, are just naturally pretty stingy with equity. And I mean, you can't blame them, right? There's only so much equity to go around. And most founders know as they go through their journey that equity is going to be something they might have to play with for various investors and people as they, go on their journey. But I think my advice, and I've watched Shark Tank a bunch. We've been involved with seen so many startups here in cybersecurity, and I don't know. I don't know how you both feel, but I feel like that general advice is not to be too stingy with the equity, because if you're willing to part with some, there can be some great returns on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a compensation perspective here for advisors, look, no one's advising to get rich, right? If you're advising to try to make money, you should probably stop doing that and go get a job at McDonald's, because I think you'll probably make more money in that way, right? It's more about compensation in the sense of making sure everyone has skin in the game, right? And it's if folks at the end of the day, if folks are compensated for their time, then they're going to be more involved. And that's basically it, right? So is there a compensation component? Absolutely. Sometimes that's equity. Sometimes that's, like a mini salary, although I definitely see equity as the more standard one. But, we're not talking about huge amounts here. It's much more about just making sure everybody has skin in the game, and you want to just align everybody's incentives, both in terms of taking the time and in terms of long-term incentives of growth of the company.
Now, I mean, general rule of thumb from what I've observed, and you both have observed a lot more than I have in this space, but generally advising less than 5% typically. When you get into an accelerator program, typically that's somewhere in 5 or 10%, right? Is that general? I mean, it varies, obviously, but generally?
Yeah, from the companies I've seen go through accelerators, I think it tends to be around like 6%, 7%. I don't know a ton about that world, to be totally honest. So I think anything in the 5 to 10 range is probably numbers I've seen. But I think the most common one that I've seen is like 6 or 7. Although I've also seen accelerators that don't take equity stakes. Sure. Weirdly enough. So.
Interesting.
Yeah, Paul, I've seen most accelerators kind of in that 7 to 10% range. 7% is kind of that rough entry layer level. So I think Zane's right, kind of 6, 7% kind of at the low end. I've seen them a little higher. Advisors, though, look, we had advisors at Layered Insight that were under 1%, right? We brought in some quality CISOs. that we wanted on staff because we really wanted to understand the CISO's challenge with container security, which is what Layered Insight was doing. But we weren't giving out huge chunks of it of equity, but they also had a more minimal role versus somebody like me coming on initially as a consultant, then taking on a chief marketing strategy role. Obviously, I ended up with more equity. So they vary also, Paul, just based on, again, it's how much time and commitment, what's the expectations, also varies on kind of what that equity percentage potentially looks like.
Yeah, I think as we kind of talked about in the beginning, I think it's important to bring back out here the term advisor ends up being this huge nebulous umbrella, right? And there's ones where, exactly like you described, you were a consultant and then you came in really to kind of fulfill an executive role. That's one style advisor. Another might be someone who does a phone call once a year, right? And that's another style of advisor. Another might be one who makes, one or two intros a quarter, and that's another style of advisor. Or someone who kind of, lays the groundwork for a security program. All of these are totally different styles. They can all be comp different in the sense of, there's totally different, full-time individual contributor or executive roles out there that are comped totally different. And so I've seen just a huge range in compensation there as a result.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those advisory kind of roles is basically making introductions, right? It sounds to me more like a referral, right? You're advising for the company and you're going to refer them customers, investors, and as we know in cybersecurity especially, getting talented people to come work for you, right? I think there's a lot of that as well. If you need a contractor to do a very specific thing, having an advisor is really nice because they may have someone like that in their network that they trust. And in that case, I think that's a really good example of a great advisory role, helping you with basically referrals, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'd say our whole industry is 1 degree of separation, right? It's such a small industry. And so the more that you can be connected with folks and have a strong network there, I think the better that it is to open doors, whether that's, for candidates, for customers, for investors, for other advisors, you name it. I'm very shocked when it's more than 1 degree of separation with anybody in the industry. That's for sure.
And I think it's also important to listen to your advisors. I think I see so many companies, right, that get maybe some of those referrals and they're like, no, we're still going to go do our own thing. Having someone that's advising, the advantage is they've been there, done that, right? And taking their advice, I think, is important. And sometimes startups, I think, just get caught up in the whole startup thing and want to go in their own direction.
It's a fine line, that's for sure.
Right. Which, I mean, it isn't always, I'm not saying it's always bad, right? But I think if you're going to enter this agreement with an advisor, you should definitely trust them enough to be able to take their advice, right? I think investors go through the same thing too. In varying levels, they try and push their various companies they've invested in certain, not directions, maybe directions technically, but more so in the referral aspect, right? Of, using various services, contractors, whatever.
It's the same for paid engagements too. I mean, if you look at some of the work that I've done for folks, sometimes they decide not to use that material.
Sure.
That's their call at the end of the day. But, what you hope is you're getting value out of your advisor and that you're leveraging the expertise and the advice they're giving you, and you actually take the action that they're asking you to do. I mean, that's the reason you bring them on in the first place. There are cases where they don't, and that's their prerogative. But I think in most cases, you'll see a positive outcome of learning from others that have gone through the process and hopefully not repeating those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason to be there in the first place, right? It's giving me flashbacks actually of pen testing, like of my pen testing days really early on, of where, you'd write a report and we've all lived through this, and then you'd come back a year later and it's basically the same report, like nothing's been patched or fixed. Kind of same thing of giving advice there. And the reality is always somewhere in the middle, right? I think to the party giving the advice, things can seem very simple from the outside, and to the party actually having to take action on the advice, it can seem really complicated and maybe too complicated. And the reality is usually somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, agreed.
I agree. Zane, any final recommendations for anybody who wants to look at advisory roles?
I don't think it's going to be any groundbreaking stuff. I think it kind of goes back to the core principles that all three of us talked about in the beginning, which is, I wouldn't jump into this just for, the sake of doing it. Really feel like you've got value to add. You've got a good relationship with whoever you're going to be advising. And really a lot of times, the first several, I think they'll tend to come to you in a lot of ways of, the more you can kind of publish stuff out there and show that you've kind of got good thoughts in the area and good kind of, I guess I'm going to use this term non-ironically for the first time ever, thought leadership in the area, and can really talk about that, then, the areas that you're a expert in might be really valuable to someone who's starting a company where that's like kind of their weak area and they're very strong in other areas. So I think, don't jump into it just because it sounds cool and you want to tack that on. Like I said, I think from a comp perspective or anything like that, no one's doing it to get rich. I think the best advisors I've ever worked with on either side of the aisle there are those who are just very passionate about helping other teams and helping other founders and really trying to make the best products or companies that they can.
We speak with investors, Zane, and even if you watch Shark Tank, right? The ones that get a lot of those investments, they're investing one reason because one of the founders of the company or all of the founders are experts in that area, right? Like that's their thing. And so many investors look for that. It sounds like in advisory roles, you're looking for the same thing. Like this person is an expert in that area, sees a problem gap and is trying to solve it. And they're the expert in that area.
Yeah, I think expert, but I think also the two can get conflated a lot, but there's expert, but there's also passion, right? Like I like working with people who are passionate about the problems that they're solving.
Sure.
And those, often if you're really passionate about an area, you kind of tend to become an expert in that area.
It's very true.
And I think bringing those two together is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, I'm good. Any other questions for Zane?
I'm good. This has been great. I think if you have a startup, you've got some good criteria to and understanding of how advisory relationships work. I think for those aspiring to be advisors, any advice if you're aspiring to be an advisor, Zane, are there certain things that you should kind of have under your belt or do to build up to that point?
Yeah, I'd say focus on the areas you're passionate on and think about how you can really deliver value on that, right? I think, off the cuff advice is very easy, but thinking about putting yourself in the shoes of people asking advice from you and thinking about the challenges that they're actually having to solve and really being able to give that much deeper advice that says, hey, I know this seems like a short-term solution to the problem, but actually here's why I'm recommending this, longer-term solution, or this is why I'm recommending something that seems counterintuitive at first. It's because I've seen the other advice go wrong in this way, and this way, right? And really being able to think about it from their perspective. So I think passion about the space and empathy with the folks that you're advising is kind of the key.
Awesome.
Zane, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it.
If anyone wants to get Zane's book, Building a Modern Security Program, please visit O'Reilly.com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.